Decision Point. There are few people who have had a ringside seat to most of the major national and international events since the 1960s. As chief White House correspondent, ABC News anchor, host of Primetime Live and his own show, The Sam Donaldson Show, Live in America, we are delighted to welcome Sam Donaldson to Decision Point. Welcome.
Glad to be here, Holly.
Yes, well, you actually grew up in El Paso, right?
Absolutely. I was very lucky. I was born in the United States, and I was born in the Southwest.
Oh, there. Wow.
My mother got up one morning from the farm on which I was raised, near Anthony, New Mexico.
Oh, okay.
It's on the west side. And said, I'm going to have this one in a hospital. And the nearest hospital was El Paso.
Oh.
So I have to tell you, I was born in Texas, but New Mexico is my native state.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. So you are kind of an El Paso native. Did you go to school in El Paso?
I did. I did. My mother, at an early age, started driving me every morning from the farm and every night back to the farm from school in El Paso. She thought the schools were better. I think she was probably right, with all due respect to Anthony and Chamberino, the little town that was near the farm. Okay. And so I went to Dudley School. It's in the Kern Place area, or was, till they tore it down. Having been born in the old Masonic Hospital, that's in the Five Points area, it's now the police station. And then eventually, after going to New Mexico Military Institute in Roswell, New Mexico, I went to Texas Western. And shortly after I did manage to graduate, they changed the name. Now, do you see a pattern here?
Yeah, well,
are you sure I'm welcome in El Paso?
Right. Yeah, well, you're definitely welcome back. But now, I read somewhere that your mother decided to send you to military school. Were you a handful as a teenager, or were you?
Well, maybe she thought I was, but I've got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, check the police records and all of that. The things I did that made me a handful, by today's standards, I would be a little guy in the sandbox playing with the children, because I didn't do anything really terrible, but I was a little precocious, I suppose.
Well, Tom,
I got a few speeding tickets.
Well, there you go. You actually knew Tom Lee, who is an icon here, and Tom Lee actually did some pretty brave things as a youngster. What were some of the kinds of things that you ended up doing that were kind of adventurous as a young man?
Well, when I was growing up on the farm, I got to the point, maybe I was 11 or so, that one night the horses got out from the corral, and it was quite a commotion, and I could drive a farm tractor, and I jumped on the farm tractor and went down the road and managed to. It was great fun. I rounded them up.
Yeah.
And do you know, for the next several months, those horses got out of that pen almost every 2 weeks.
Oh, my gosh.
And I had to jump on the tractor and round them up.
Right, round them up. Yeah.
I wonder who let them out.
Yeah, gee, I don't know.
And then later on, I flew here, little light planes, you know.
So you got your pilot's license?
Cessnas, 172, the old Aranca, and things like that. And I would do stupid things. And I was just very lucky.
Yeah.
I didn't kill myself.
Right.
Okay, here's a dirt road in the middle of summer when it's 102 degrees. And at the end of this very small dirt road in the desert, there is a sand dune with mesquite. I could take off. And twice when I'd land at El Paso International Airport, I'd have to pull off the taxiway just briefly and take the spigs of mesquite out of the tricycle gear before I took it back to Miller Brothers and say thanks for the rental. Now, another 2 or 3 inches and we wouldn't be talking today. That's what I meant by stupid things.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that was good preparation for some of the international reporting that you did in dangerous places, though.
Well, I've seen presidents have to pull more than mesquite out of their tricycle gear at international conferences.
Yeah, right, I'm sure. Now, so growing up in El Paso probably shaped you a little bit differently than some of the other colleagues that you have who grew up in more.
I think so. When I left El Paso, I was in the Army after Texas Western. For 2.5 years, I served on active duty. I went to Dallas, and I finally got a job at the old KRLD TV, a CBS affiliate in Dallas, and then I went to New York, and finally I failed in New York. Miserably.
Really? You really failed?
I hated that city ever since. And then I got a job in Washington 2 weeks after John Kennedy was inaugurated.
Wow.
But my journey was really basically from the Southwest. I grew up in a Republican household. My father was deceased. My mother, I think she died in 1988 at the age of 93. And President Reagan, who did these things, not because it was me, but he was this kind of person, called me. And he said, Sam, I understand that your mother has died. I said, yes, sir, she has. And he said, well, we'll see each other on the other side. And I said, thank you for saying that. But I must tell you something. If George Bush, in those days, 1988, we didn't have to say which George Bush we were talking about, were to lose this election this fall, because he's lost New Mexico, 4 electoral votes in those days, and he's lost New Mexico by 1 vote. It's because my mother is not
Your
alive,
mother's
because
not
she
there
never
voting
voted
for
for
him.
him as a Republican.
Okay.
And President Reagan said, well, we'll see each other on the other side, and I thanked him and we hung up. I guess the point of my story is I grew up in the Southwest with fundamental conservative values in a Republican household. And when I went east for the first time at the age of 26, that's who I was. And then I got exposed to all these other things. For instance, I knew when I grew up that if a man who was able-bodied, didn't have physical problems, was out of work, he was a bum. I mean, there were jobs. He didn't want to work. And then I saw these great ghettos back east where many, many able-bodied men couldn't find a job. In those days, particularly, they were black. They had no education. And I thought, maybe I have to learn a new thing here. Maybe it's not what I thought, because in the Southwest, that's the way I think I saw it.
Yeah.
And so ever since, I've said to people, believe what you believe and what you've been taught and what your experience tells you. But keep your mind open to new evidence. Keep your mind open to new things and new people living in a different way, and kind of see what's going on here. And maybe you'll learn something.
Well, if you look at that whole issue of having an open mind, what do you think was the most stunning or profound thing that you observed and learned in your travels and in your job as a reporter?
I learned, I guess, as a job as a reporter about other people, not only in the United States, but overseas. I never was posted for a length of time overseas, but I did serve in Vietnam. I was a correspondent for ABC News, and I made several trips overseas to do stories. And what I learned that other people, I'll give you an example. In Vietnam one day, at Cam Ranh Bay, our big installation there, I was there shooting a story of some kind, when someone gave me a tip. He said, General Kissinger, no relation to Henry Kissinger, who was in charge of that installation, American general, has made his nephew his top aide. Oh, I said, we got a story here, you know. So I told Tran, our Vietnamese cameraman, now he's going to come out very shortly for lunch, and he's going to have a lieutenant on his right take lots of pictures of the two of them together, of the lieutenant, you know. And I told Tran what the story was, because good camera people are not button pushers. I mean, if you tell them what the story is, they will find a way to, at least in my day, reproduce it on film or video. And so you could have something that really aids and helps in describing it. And Tran looked at me and said, so he made his nephew his aide. I said, well, that's wrong. What? I said, I don't expect you to understand the word nepotism, but we believe that those kinds of jobs should be open to competition. He said, no. He said, we take care of our families. If we don't take care of our families, we should be punished for this. He said, you make me feel dirty wanting to shoot this. I said, just shoot it. He did. And then, of course, the tip was wrong. I learned later we never used the film. But that kind of incident, and I had many of them, not just in Vietnam, but elsewhere. And I had to think, other people have other cultures.
Yeah.
Was Tran wrong? Was I wrong? For me in the United States, I think I was right. For Tran in Vietnam, he was right. Am I to tell him he's wrong? Well, do I run the world? Other people's cultures and their religions. I don't need to tell you about the multiplicity of religions, many of them tied together in the belief of a single deity. Some of them still, and forget the Romans and the Greeks, they think they have a lot of gods, Kali and what have you.
Right.
I think I know something about my own view of religion, but maybe, and I don't want to offend any of your viewers, maybe it's not my job to go tell them that they're wrong about their religion. And maybe it is if you think that way.
Right.
I'm not going to argue it.
What do you think about the whole coverage of, like, for example, Islam and Sharia law?
Well,
Do you think we go soft on that, or do you think it's accurately portrayed? Because it is.
As your viewers know, I have a lot of opinions.
Sure, we want to hear them.
But I don't always think I'm right, and I'm going to answer your question. It says I'm reminded that Pat Moynihan, he ended up as a senator from New York, used to have this expression. He'd say, "Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but not their own set of facts."
Yeah,
all right.
and that's a good one.
I think that's a good one.
Yeah.
I think, first of all, the fear that Sharia law is going to come to the United States and overrun us all is so overblown as to be not at the moment or in contemplation for my grandchildren something to worry about. Do I know much about it? No, but I know enough about it to know that I don't want to live that way. I don't want to live by it. And particularly women don't want to live under Sharia law.
Yeah, right.
Because we believe in this country, or at least I do, thank goodness we have marched from the cave toward equality. Women got the vote. Woodrow Wilson, the good boy from Staunton, Virginia, he was a visionary, he was a dreamer, and in many senses wonderful. He was a PhD, but he was a Southerner, and he didn't want to give women the vote. And Alice Paul chained herself as they arrested the suffragettes at the White House fence. And he, you can argue with people, that's fine. You can ask them, the people, that's fine. But if you have to get something done, you have to say to them, we are going to do this, or you will suffer the consequences. Mr. President, your party, going to suffer the consequences if we don't have the vote. Ronald Reagan used to say, you don't have to make them see the light, just make them feel the heat.
Yeah. Who was one of your favorite presidents in terms of covering them and working with them and that kind of thing?
Well, I'll answer that because you asked the question I can answer. In covering them and working with them as a reporter, and they were the president, because I don't give this president I thought was wonderful, this president was terrible and all that. Although we can analyze their accomplishments or their lack of them.
Right.
Reagan, clearly, I covered him his 8 years in the White House, was really interesting. I started out a very skeptic about him. I covered him slightly in California, interviewed him 3 or 4 times on our Sunday program, things like that, but I didn't really know him. And I knew about him, of course. And I was a little skeptical about him and his views. 20 years earlier, he had been for abolishing Social Security. I'm not. Although today some people still want to do it. Okay, you're welcome to your view.
Well, I think the government's already doing a pretty good job of that. But
well, they pay fee
shape
in one
that
sense.
it's in. But according to my kids, they're not counting on it.
And a lot of people thought Ronald Reagan would blow us up by going to war with the Soviet Union immediately. And also, we all noticed early on, President Reagan, I think, had a good mind when he wanted to use it. And he wanted to use it on things that he thought were important or that interested him. The rest of them, he wanted you to take care of it. If you were his chief of staff or his secretary of state, here, you handle that. Bring me if there's a major decision on the things that I think are important. For instance, you handle the budget, but you know enough not to bring him one that says, let's raise taxes. Yeah. And you try to administer the welfare program, but you know he wants to get that woman in Chicago driving that big Cadillac who goes to the welfare window off the rolls, right? You know that. So,
sure.
Other than that, but I found that even though he would make mistakes about what your name is or who you are, that wasn't the important thing. The important thing was he stood for certain principles that worked. He administered his office, I think, in a way that brought credit on the country. I have some problems with some of his policies, but so what? I think history will record him as one of our best presidents.
Now, what's it like to be a reporter at the White House? Or maybe I should talk about the way it used to be, and maybe it's very different now.
I think it's all changing. When I came to Washington in John Kennedy's administration, I was not a White House correspondent, or I'd go down there frequently. I was too timid to ever try to ask him a question.
That shocks me. I can't imagine you as timid.
One learns.
Yeah, right.
But the changes basically are the way, first of all, various White Houses succeeding each other have learned to try to manage the press and with greater success. And by manage the press, they used to put the phrase, go over the heads of the media, if you will,
sure.
or certainly the gross amount of the media that covers them. And the techniques they've learned are so numerous. When I covered the White House, for instance, I began as the White House correspondent and covered Jimmy Carter for 4 years. And we walked with him. People think I shout at presidents. Nobody ever heard me shout at Jimmy Carter. He's walking right there. Secret Service is around him in public, but he answers questions. I ask him a question. Others ask him. He's answered it. When President Reagan came along, that was changed. The staff made certain that in public he was kept as far away from us as possible. They didn't trust him as much as I came to trust him. They didn't want him saying things because he had this habit of, you ask him a question, he'd answer you. And the answer might not be politic. The answer might not work over here. Nigeria might not like the answer.
Right.
So the staff would have the Secret Service do something which is not their job, apply political safety. Their job is physical safety.
Right.
So it changed then. It was more difficult. And succeeding the Obama administration, now it doesn't help them though. Have you noticed? What helps or hurts a president is that administration's accomplishments or lack of them, his ability to execute his job or not, and all the management of the press. It certainly helped President Obama get elected.
Yeah.
And in the right, more power to him. Has it helped his ratings? Has it helped his standings? I haven't noticed.
Yeah. No,
I haven't noticed.
It gets worse every day. Yeah.
The result is the bottom line, and people in this country are smart enough to figure it out.
Do you think that the media has been softer on President Obama than perhaps President Bush or
I think
other presidents?
maybe a lot of reporters or a lot of editors in 2008 welcomed the idea of the first African American president. I think that's true. I have not taken a survey. This is anecdotal opinion I'm giving you. Certainly it's not true today. Where did you learn? Now, a lot of people watch Fox, but not many compared to the people that watch everybody else, not ABC necessarily. Right. So where did everybody hear about this terrible rollout of the Affordable Care Act? From the media, unless each one of you calls the White House every day and has a secret source. They used to tell me when I covered Bill Clinton that we were soft on him, second term.
Yeah.
Well, not noticeably. Monica, do you remember the name? I remember, pardon the word, I'm exaggerating, being among the reporters that savaged him in an effort to get him to come clean on that. Oh no, you treated him with kid gloves. That's not true, folks. But you see, here's what I discovered. When I covered Ronald Reagan, a lot of Republicans didn't like me. They thought that I was trying purposely to tear down the best president we ever had viciously, that I was a commie simp, that I was Democratic foil, whatever you were. But the Democrats liked me. Oh, thank goodness you're there, one reporter to keep old Bonzo on his toes. And then when I covered Bill Clinton, guess what happened? That's right, the Democrats said, what is wrong with you? I used to like you, but I guess you just got rich and joined the country club of the Republican Party because you're trying to tear down the best president we've ever had. He cares for the poor, he cares for the underprivileged, and there you are. And some of the Republicans, not many because Republicans, the elephant's a symbol, long memory. They said, well, my son, you're older now, and you're doing better. You see, with age comes some maturity. Well, thank you, folks.
Yes, so
it was the same me.
Right.
Same vicious or kind or what me, you described me. I was the same guy trying to do my job in the same way with different presidents. But if you like this president and I said something that suggested he might not have done a very good thing here, you'd say, well, why would Donaldson say that? He must have a political agenda. Rather than, he says this is a fact, it bothers me. Should I really look and see whether it was a fact? And if so, should I re-examine my view? Most of us don't do that. And if we don't like a president, someone says something good about them. For instance, I don't know about the figures being honest, but they have to be, or else they're in even more trouble than today. As we speak, the White House says they have now signed up 6 million people for the Affordable Care Act. If that's true, it doesn't mean the Affordable Care Act is going to succeed, but it means that all the talk that the critics, oh, not a chance and all that, may be wrong, could be wrong. You want to examine that possibility, or no, I know it's no good and I'm not going to. Okay, you just go ahead and think whatever you think, but if you're wrong about your thinking, it's not going to help you.
Well, if you look at the whole issue of the Affordable Care Act and all of that, it definitely has gotten a lot of coverage and so forth. But what about the way that people are saying that President Obama's using executive powers more to get things through, and the whole partisanship and all of that? Do you think that's really changed?
I think well, all presidents have used their executive powers to the extent they feel they can get away with doing it. Now, by all, I don't mean Tyler, I don't know what he did, or Pierce and all that. But in modern times, the ones I've been doing. I think there are already a number of challenges that will get eventually some of the Supreme Court about some of the things President Obama has done, which on the surface appear he does not have the authority to do. For instance, the law is the law. Like it or not like it, the Affordable Care Act was written by Congress, passed by both houses, signed by the president. Now, when I went to Dudley School even, forget high school or college, I was taught the only way you could change a law was, again, through a constitutional process of some sort. That the president does not have the power to say, well, we'll obey this part, and we'll extend for a year this part, and we'll do this, and we won't do that. No, sir. You'll do, because we elected you as the chief magistrate to see that the laws were properly enforced. That's your job, not decide what you like about the law and what you don't. So I think there's been a challenge like that. Now, if I may say, if you give me another hat and say, well, why would he do that? Just because he wants to tear down the country? For all of the time he's been in office, from the day he was inaugurated, Mitch McConnell said, my aim here, my top priority, he's the Republican leader, is to defeat Barack Obama. Well, yeah, I mean, you want your guy in, not the other party. No, sir, your top aim is to support this country and help it. When I covered the Senate in the 60s, I watched the Republicans in the minority oppose much of the legislation. But then when they had won enough concessions, sign on. Medicare. I covered Medicare. It was a great expansion of medical care. We were arguing about the Affordable Care Act today. The Republicans thought it was the wrong way to go. They weren't mean, evil people. They thought it was not government's role to do this or that. They lost. So Medicare passed the Senate 87-13. Almost half the Republicans who thought it was the wrong way to go voted for it because they understood, A, the majority had won. Elections have consequences, folks, and just because you don't agree with who won, in my view, your effort to make certain that person cannot succeed in the way that a president who has won might, if it had been your party, is wrong. You hurt the country when you do that. But these Republicans didn't do that. Today, excuse me, I remember I was born a Republican and voted to this day for Republican presidential nominees as well as Democratic nominees. Republicans, to a man jack, won't, if Obama said, let's have a resolution praising motherhood, they'd say, no, there's something wrong with your resolution. That's wrong. So that's the other side of my little diatribe about how I think he has overstepped his authority and should be checked on it as president.
Well, if you take a look at the stories that you have covered over the years, which one was the one that made you the most angry or upset, that you thought was the most outrageous?
Depends on what year you're talking about.
Right. So a lot of them.
I was always a front burner reporter, not a historian. I know something about history, but it was what's today's story, who did what to whom, what could be the possible effect, and tomorrow it might change. So I get upset quite often. At the moment, as you can kind of tell, I'm upset at the gridlock in our country, not just in Washington, in some state capitals, but not all. The Chinese are not stopping. Oh, those Americans will get their act together and they'll start once again cooperating with each other and making a deal and negotiate and do the things that are normal. Meanwhile, they're eating our lunch while we're sitting there. I'm calling you a name, you're calling me a name. I'm not going to support you on a motherhood resolution, and you're not going to support me if I say let's cut all the budget that you want cut, because we want to win with our party. You know why I think that's true, Holly? I think we're at a great divide in the country between very good people, it's almost half and half, who say, this has been a wonderful country the way it was. My grandfather, my great-grandfather came here, tilled the land, opened the store. We went to school, went to church here, synagogue, whatever it is. I don't want it to change. Who are all these new people? I don't want to, I mean, come on, guys. And the people who say change is inevitable. The world always is changing. Once we hid behind our two oceans, now we're part of a world in which our competitors are out there trying to eat our lunch, and we better get with it. And we're going to have to negotiate with them. And we're going to have to make deals over here, just as, you know, you make a deal with your spouse. She wants to go out, you want to stay home. So you negotiate. You stay home, in my case. But the point is, this idea in Washington that we can't make a deal. Pete Domenici, who until recently was our senior senator in New Mexico, in 1997, was the chief negotiator for Republicans on the new budget. And Bill Clinton himself was the chief negotiator for the Democrats on the new budget. And they fought. And at first it was as tight as it is at the moment. The Republicans wanted to do this and didn't like some of the programs, thought it was waste and, you know, all that. The president thought they were mean, all that. They finally negotiated and made a deal. When Pete Domenici announced the deal from the Senate and congressional side, he said, and these are almost his exact words, check it up for the exact ones. He said, President Clinton and we Republicans have negotiated and made an agreement for a new budget. The president did not get everything he wanted. We did not get everything we wanted. But we think we've got an agreement that will help move the country forward. We had 4 years of surplus. Now, I didn't say small deficits. 4 years, ladies and gentlemen, of surplus. Now, that wasn't the only reason. There were other economic factors. I said to Pete about 2 years ago, Senator, today they'd read you out of the Republican Party. You negotiated with Democrats? You gave up? You made a deal? Folks, that's life. And we either start doing that again on a national level or we're all ruined.
Well, when you think about your own journey as a news anchor, with your own show and so forth, what is the thing that you are most grateful for in all of that?
Well, first, selfishly, the opportunity. Yeah. This is still the land of opportunity.
So
I come from a farm in
huh?
southern New Mexico to do pretty well in the news business and make some money. That's amazing to me, but there it was. I was very fortunate. I was lucky, too. We don't have the time, but I can tell you about lucky breaks along the way. That were just that. It wasn't that I had planned things so well and that I was so brilliant and, you know, so much better than my competitors. We're just lucky.
If you were, is there a news story that if you were still in the thick of the business that you would be covering, or either that's not getting covered or covered differently?
No, it's all being covered, sometimes well, sometimes not so well. But the story is change. And by change, I mean within that story, look at the things that come before the Supreme Court today. Well, lifestyle, gays, lesbians versus heterosexuals, abortion. Ever since 1974, that battle continues to be fought and should be. I mean, that's fine. But the story of change, when it can occur, how it occurs, when it's turned back, what are the consequences in large, is the story that now interests me. Yes, individual stories too. I like human interest stories.
Right.
But as a political reporter, that's the story.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. It's been delightful.
It waits for no man or woman.
That's correct, but we do have a part 2 coming up next week, so we can continue the discussion. So please join us next week for the second part of my interview. What do you remember about the stories that Sam Donaldson has covered over the years? We'd love to know. We'd love to hear from you on Facebook, Twitter, or our website, kscetv.com. Thank you so much for watching.